you guys know the drill by now. We are going to launch into our recap of Critical Role episode 104. Before we hop into our discussion, we cut that out. We host it separately. So if you're just on that recap video and you want to see our full thoughts, then we will link it down in the description below. But without further ado, episode 104, the Conclave.
The Cradle's Convocation.
The Cradle's Convocation. Sorry, I got too much Worlds Beyond Number on the mind right now.
Yeah.
So the episode begins with Bell's Hells basically barging in on this meeting of Exandria, because basically all of these different kingdoms and factions are represented here within the Platinum Sanctuary in Vasselheim. And basically what they're talking about is what to do with this entire situation of the Solstice and Ludinus and Prodathos. And there are all of these, again, important people: Jamansa Ord, the Bright Queen, Keyleth. Basically, everyone is represented here. And Matt describes that the person speaking right now, and I'm probably going to butcher this, is Galfeed of the Ember Vigil, which Imogen recognizes as being the Archmage of the Sugwaras, capital of the Talent Highlands. Again, bear with me on those pronunciations, but basically everyone is arguing about what exactly needs to be done here, and some fear, like, what if we take too long and the gods break out of the Divine Gate and just lay ruin to everything, because we've kept our hands tied too long. And at that statement, Ashton just laughs. And it's at this point that everyone turns their heads towards Bell's Hells. They wonder, like, who are these people? And at that point, Keyleth kind of speaks up and vouches for them and says, this is Bell's Hells. They've been out in the field while we've been here just arguing. She then projects a vision, an illusion of the Hellcatch Valley that shows where their encampment had been and how it's basically just been destroyed, and it's been terraformed, where now around the Malleus Key, there is like this fortress that has sprung up like almost instantly. And Keela says, we have to act now. Jamansa Ord says, I agree. I stand with them. Like, who else stands with us in taking steps and doing something about this? And Bell's Hells obviously say they are in. So does the Clovis Concord. But then arguments again turn to, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to wipe out everybody up there? Because as Bell's Hells interjects, there are innocents. There are Ruidians up there that aren't part of this conflict. There's a whole world up there, a whole ecosystem. Because, again, they've been up there, which Keyleth vouched for. So Bell's Hells kind of take a moment to explain everything that they saw while they were up there. And that includes their vision of downfall that they had in Aeor. Basically, they gave everybody the recap, the Pixelists recap on the last 5 to 10 episodes. And after they say the downfall information about how the gods banded together and struck down Aeor, the Holy Curator's response to that is good. They deserved it. Like, the gods did what they had to do, basically. And before they launch into a big, deific debate, Keela says, I know this is important to discuss, but we also need to make sure we take into account the lives of these innocent people on Ruidus in our decisions. And in order to speak to that, she introduces this hooded figure next to her, who is Ivaroa, the Boromodo that Bell's Hells rescued on Ruidus. And so Ivaroa gets up and speaks of her life on Ruidus and basically how everything is there and how they've lived under the tyranny of the Weave Mind, who are working with Ludinus. She says she will offer any insight and help she can in return for consideration being taken for her people, that they won't just be, mindlessly killed with the rest of Ruidus. Bell's Hells, of course, back up everything Ivaroa is saying. And a member of the Cerberus Assembly then steps up and is like, well, how do we know we can trust you, Bell's Hells? And of course, everyone thinks that's really rich coming from a member of the Cerberus Assembly. But he makes the point of, Ludinus was even able to sway members of the Assembly. Like, how do we know, like, you aren't secretly working for him? And it's when this argument starts to get going that High Bearer Vord steps in and is like, everyone's tired. We're all antsy right now. Let's take a rest for the night, adjourn, and then we'll convene with our respective circles and then meet back tomorrow and discuss this fresh. So the meeting adjourns at that point. Bell's Hells then go meet up with Keyleth. There's a little bit of small talk with Pike and Grog and some fun moments there. Vexalia de Rollo is also present. And the main thing they talk about there is how they trapped Delilah, which of course the members of Vox Machina are very interested to hear about. Vex in particular is very happy that she has been caged within Laudna. But then Keyleth takes Bell's Hells on a walk out of here towards the Birth Heart, which is an area of Vasselheim basically dedicated to the Wild Mother, the Birth Heart being this massive tree. And specifically, they just basically give Keyleth the full download on what happened in Aor, what happened with the Downfall, 3 episodes, and just what do they do? Whose side are they on here? Can they trust the gods? Should they help them? Basically, these same kind of philosophical debates they've been having largely for the entire campaign. And the conversation eventually turns to the fact that Keyleth has literally spoken with the gods before. And Bell's Hells is very interested in that. But even still, Keyleth recognizes the humanity in the gods. They're not perfect, and she, for one, isn't even that religious. Save for the Wild Mother. That's like the one she kind of rocks with. And as she's saying this, they walk up to this massive Birth Heart tree, and Orym in particular is kind of stirred by it. So much so that he takes out his sword Seedling and kind of places it between 2 of the roots and kneels down to pray, essentially. And when he does this, these vines completely envelop him in like a cocoon. And that's essentially where we go to break on the first half.
Yeah, so coming back from the break, we basically have the party all like seeing Orym like disappeared. Like, what do we do now? And then we get a cut over to Orym, who is in the essentially the Wild Mother's plane, and finds himself in this beautiful, like ever-reaching like plains and forests and wildlife and like this gorgeous domain of nature. And before him is essentially the Wild Mother. I think Matt describes her as being a combination of like vines and branches and like a large tree with like flowers and a face. Notably, the Wild Mother doesn't speak, which, by the way, is typically how Matt has acted out this character in the past. But Orym essentially pleads on behalf of his party and on all of humankind and is like, hey, like I know you're flawed. Like we're basically trying to do our best. Like help me understand like what needs to happen moving forward. From this conversation, there's a number of emotions that the Wild Mother is going to show, but ultimately the Wild Mother is going to give Orym a vision of essentially the day that Predathos was banished entirely. The vision includes all of the gods together with a star coming and crashing onto, I don't know if it was an island or like just like a plot of land, but essentially it is the vision extends to this plot of land then being lifted up into the air and being encased as essentially the red moon and being cast off into space. And Matt also describes like the screams and the people who would one day become Meridians who were cast out with Predathos, basically. Something of note here in this vision is that Orym is asked to make a wisdom saving throw. He fails, and then Matt gives a very cryptic line of essentially something to the effect of something in you has been broken, or another way to put it would be something in you has taken root. Which, what the heck? Orym comes back to Vasselheim, and essentially in coming back shares like, hey, this is what I saw. There's some chatter around like what could this mean, but ultimately they decide, okay, this is a great data point to inform our at dawn we plan discussion that's going to be happening at the Trial Forge in the morning. Before they leave, though, a couple things happen. Chetney gathers up a couple of the branches of this tree And then also Orem removes his sword from the tree and notices that the short sword seems to have changed into a long sword. And Matt hands over the identification of this now exalted form of Seedling, and basically says that this is a modern day vestige of Divergence known as a relic of the Red Solstice. And basically says, it would make sense for it because it's not from the Divergence, but this is one of the many items that the deities themselves have chosen to empower during the span of this solstice. Naturally, the cast just goes crazy. They're like, we have to collect all of them, as any good D&D player would. And basically, they go back to rest for the night. And as we've seen happen many times that there's downtime, the party basically talks about what should we do next? What do we think about Ludinus? What do we think about the gods? Kind of like the age-old conversation that they're going to have. And they do ultimately decide maybe we should go take out the Bloody Bridge. Like maybe that's the next best path. They end up tabling that as the conversation is kind of fizzling out. And they decide, let's play a drinking game, basically. This is like a shenanigan form of truth or dare and also spin the bottle. There's a moment where Matt's like, I don't even understand the rules of this game. But basically the way it works is you're asked a question, and if you opt not to answer the question, you have to spin the bottle and kiss whoever it points to. Discord did demand that I say every single combination of kisses that happen here. I will not do so, only because I don't remember all of them. Though we do get a funny moment of Dorian and Chetney, who were once quasi-rivals early on in the campaign, so that was a bit funny too. But some questions of interest that were asked. Ashton was asked basically like, "Hey, you've been the most like open about being standoffish to the gods. Like, what do you think about all this? And essentially, do we have to worry about you?" And Ashton basically says like, "While I feel the way I do about the gods, I agree that Ludinus needs to be stopped." Other questions, I think, to Fern and Imogen in particular about them being Ruidus born and basically being like, hey, like, would you ever conspire with Ludinus? Like, do we need to worry about you? And Fern, who I think they had done like a zone of truth during this, Fern actually beat the zone's DC, and I think opted to kiss, actually, not like in a cryptic way, but it was pretty clear that, yes, you can count on me. However, I still want to opt to do the spin the bottle. And then Imogen also basically says like, yeah, I'd be totally comfortable with you guys taking me out if I did change sides. Probably the most important question we get though is one from Laudna to Dorian of basically, hey, how are you? Like, how have you been doing since your brother died, which was only a few days prior? And we get one of the most beautiful speeches, honestly, in my opinion, of the campaign, from Dorian, kind of just talking about his feelings in this moment. And basically just being like, like there's a mission ahead of us and like we have to continue on. So the night simmers down, everyone goes to bed. However, we do have Ashton go to Fern and they basically begin to make out as the night ends. In the morning, they get up, they go to the Trial Forge. There's a number of people here. This is like the smaller group of like their company. You have Keyleth, you have Allura. I don't remember who else was present in this, but it's basically like
the Bright Queen was there.
Thank you. And there is also a moment, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is a moment where Ashton, after being told to be subtle about his condition of his head, like, yeah. I can't remember if he burned a rage or not, but like spins up his skull. And the Bright Queen basically is like, yeah, we're going to have to, investigate this when this is all said and done. Which Ashton's like, great, nothing bad could happen from that. But separate from that, though, there's all these conversations of like, hey, so here's the Bloody Bridge. Oh, and there's these other variables. We know that Ludinus is getting close to the core. We assume that someone Ruidus born has to be able to pass through this veil that's guarding the core. And we also know of Oso Kruth, who is guarding the Bloody Bridge. And there's still the Weave Mine to take care of. And Keyleth is basically like, okay, we can't deal with all of these things because if we take care of one, it's going to alert all the others. So the only best path forward is going to be doing a 3-pronged attack, 3 different groups attacking each of these places. And she's like, I think I know just the people who could help with this kind of stuff. But for Bell's Hells, we need someone who's Ruidus born who can go to the core, and you have 2 people on your party who are Ruidus born. So that part's going to be for you. The meeting adjourns with the plan to kind of bring this plan to the greater group later in the day. And then as they're leaving, Imogen feels this pain in her head. She gets like this vision of sort of the storm we're used to, but it's settled a bit. And she hears a seemingly almost optimistic voice of Liliana saying Imogen. And that is where the episode ends. Episode 104, The Cradle's Convocation. And if you're watching just our recap, we want to know what you thought about the episode. So click the link below to see our full episode thoughts and theories. And that was the ep.